The holographic display flickered in the central chamber of the Galactic Council station, showing images that made Counselor Vresh's throat sacs inflate with what could only be described as disgust. Rows upon rows of decorated corpses, dead vegetation brought indoors, humans celebrating around the decaying remains of once living trees. This is what we've admitted to the Council, Vresh announced to anyone within hearing range. His voice carried across the diplomatic plaza where representatives from 40 different species conducted their daily business. A species that worships death? Ambassador Riley Chun had been reviewing trade agreements at a nearby data terminal when the commotion started. She recognized the images immediately. Her own quarters contained a small potted evergreen, carefully maintained and decorated with simple lights. She'd known this moment would come eventually. "Those are holiday decorations, Counselor," Riley said, approaching the Vrethian diplomat with measured steps. "A cultural tradition from Earth." Vresh turned his bulbous eyes toward her, his skin shifting to a darker purple that signaled amusement among his kind. "Cultural tradition? You slaughter living organisms, parade their corpses through your dwellings, and hang baubles from their dying branches. Tell me, Ambassador, do you also collect the bodies of small animals for aesthetic purposes?" Laughter rippled through the gathered aliens. A Quillax scholar named Plith skittered forward on 6 legs, her mandibles clicking with what her species considered intellectual superiority. "I've studied primitive cultures across the galaxy, Ambassador Chun. Death worship appears in the earliest stages of civilization, before species develop true ethical frameworks. Most grow beyond it. Apparently, humanity has not." Riley kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. "If the Council would permit me to explain," Vresh interrupted. "What is there to explain? The evidence speaks plainly. You cut down living trees, watch them die slowly in your homes, and celebrate this process. The barbarism is self-evident." A crowd had formed now. Representatives from the Keltheran collective observed silently, their crystalline forms refracting the station's artificial light. The insectoid Travix chittered among themselves. Even normally diplomatic Entheran delegates seemed troubled by the images. Down in the lower maintenance levels, Danny Ortiz heard about the confrontation through his comm unit. The young human technician had been installing new atmosphere processors, but the news made his hands pause over the control panel. He'd put up a small tree in the human recreation room just 3 days ago. A real one, shipped at great expense from Earth. The smell of pine needles reminded him of better times. "You hearing this?" asked his co-worker, a Keltheran named Orth. "They're tearing into your ambassador pretty hard up there." Danny wiped sweat from his forehead. "It's just a tree. Why do they care so much?" "Because they don't understand," Orth replied, his crystalline voice resonating with unusual gentleness. "And what they don't understand, they fear. Or in this case, mock." Back in the diplomatic plaza, the situation had escalated. More counselors had arrived, drawn by the spectacle. Riley found herself surrounded by aliens who seemed to take personal offense at humanity's holiday traditions. "I propose a formal inquiry," Plith announced, her voice amplified across the plaza. "The Council should investigate whether humanity's disturbing practices indicate deeper psychological instabilities. Species that cannot move beyond death fixation rarely contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization." Several delegates voiced agreement. Vresh seemed particularly pleased with this development. "Seconded. Let the humans explain why we should tolerate such primitive behavior on a station dedicated to progress and unity." Riley could have argued, could have pointed out the hypocrisy of species that consumed live prey, judging humanity's plant decorations. Could have mentioned the Vrethian tradition of preserving their dead in crystalline suspension and displaying them in family shrines. But she learned that defensiveness rarely won debates at the Council. "I welcome the inquiry," she said calmly. "In fact, I request a formal session to present the full context of this tradition. Not just images stripped of meaning, but the complete cultural significance." This seemed to surprise Vresh. "You want to defend this practice publicly?" "I want to explain it," Riley corrected. "There's a difference." Plitha's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of interest. Very well. The Cultural Committee will schedule a session. I suggest you prepare a compelling argument, Ambassador. Your species' reputation may depend on it. As the crowd dispersed, Riley returned to her quarters. The small evergreen stood in the corner, its lights casting gentle shadows across the walls. She touched one of the ornaments, a simple glass sphere that reflected her face back at her in miniature. Her comm unit buzzed. It was Danny, asking if she was all right. She assured him she was, then spent the next hour composing a message to Earth. She needed access to specific facilities, specific people. Most importantly, she needed a live feed that would show the Council something they clearly had never considered. The response came back within 2 hours. Permission granted. The director of Riverside Children's Home in Seattle had agreed to participate. So had facilities in 15 other cities across Earth. Riley smiled slightly as she began preparing her presentation. The Council wanted to understand humanity's dead tree tradition. She would show them, but not in the way they expected, because the truth wasn't about trees at all. It was about what those trees represented, about light and darkness, about remembering and hoping, about children who had lost everything finding something worth celebrating. Let them mock the dead trees. Once they understood what those trees meant to the most vulnerable members of humanity, the laughter would die in their throats. Riley dimmed the lights in her quarters until only the trees' glow remained. Tomorrow, she would face the Council. Tonight, she would remember why these traditions mattered. The tree stood silent and still, its branches heavy with meaning that crossed light years and cultures. Soon, the galaxy would understand, or at least some of them would. And for the children waiting back on Earth, that would be enough. The Council's main chamber filled quickly the next morning. Word had spread about the inquiry, and representatives came not out of genuine interest but for entertainment. Watching a human squirm under interrogation promised to be the highlight of an otherwise routine session. Riley entered through the primary entrance, her presentation files loaded and ready. She wore formal Earth diplomatic attire, deep blue with silver accents, and carried herself with the practiced calm of someone who'd faced hostile audiences before. Danny watched from the public gallery above, surrounded by curious aliens who whispered among themselves. Ambassador Chun, Counselor Vresh began, his voice dripping with false courtesy. We appreciate your willingness to educate us about humanity's peculiar customs. Please enlighten us. Why do you murder trees? Riley activated the holographic projector. Images filled the air above the council floor. We don't murder trees, Counselor. We honor them. But to understand that, you need to understand Earth seasons. The holos shifted to show Earth rotating through its year. Regions tilted away from the sun, darkness creeping across landscapes as winter arrived. For half our planet at any given time, the year brings periods of extended darkness and cold. Our ancestors faced months where crops wouldn't grow, where survival itself was uncertain. Irrelevant. Plith interrupted. You have technology now. Climate control. Artificial lighting. Why continue primitive practices? Because traditions carry meaning beyond their original purpose, Riley replied. During those dark months, our ancestors brought evergreen branches into their homes. Trees that stayed green when everything else died. They represented hope, persistence, the promise that life would return. The holos showed ancient human settlements, families gathering around fires. Branches hung with simple decorations. Different cultures developed different traditions. Some lit candles, some gave gifts, some sang songs, but the core remained the same: light in darkness, community in isolation, hope when the world seemed hopeless. Vresh made a derisive sound. So you admit it, a superstitious practice from a less evolved time. Why not abandon it now that you understand planetary mechanics and orbital dynamics? Riley let the question hang for a moment. The holos shifted again, showing modern Earth cities, skyscrapers and transport systems, and all the markers of advanced civilization. Because we understand something you apparently don't, Counselor, progress isn't measured by what you abandon. It's measured by what you choose to keep. More images appeared. Families and homes across Earth, decorating trees together. Children laughing. Adults sharing memories. The trees stood central to the gatherings, their branches heavy with ornaments that clearly held personal significance. Each decoration tells a story, Riley explained. This one marks a child's first year. That one commemorates a grandparent who passed. This crystal sphere reflects light from candles my grandmother's grandmother brought from the old country. We don't just decorate trees. We create living history. Living. Plitha's mandibles clicked sharply. The trees are dead, Ambassador. You're creating monuments to death. The trees give their beauty so families can gather, Riley countered. Is that so different from the Quillax practice of weaving memorial tapestries from the silk of deceased hive mothers? Or the Vrethian tradition of crystallizing your honored dead? Vresh's throat sacs inflated dangerously. How dare you compare? I'm not comparing, Riley said firmly. I'm pointing out that every species has traditions that honor the past while celebrating the present. Ours happens to involve trees. The chamber erupted in argument. Some delegates seemed to consider Riley's points. Others doubled down on their mockery. Through it all, Riley waited patiently for the noise to subside. You still haven't explained the wastefulness, called out a Travix representative. Resources spent on dying vegetation. The inefficiency is staggering. Riley nodded slowly. You're right. It is inefficient. If we measured everything by pure resource allocation, many things we do would seem wasteful. Art, music, taking time to celebrate birthdays. But civilizations that optimize only for efficiency tend to lose something essential. She changed the holos again. He showed not family homes, but public spaces. Town squares with massive trees. Community centers. Shopping districts. We also put trees in public spaces. Anyone can see them. Anyone can enjoy them. The cost is shared because the joy is shared. Shared with whom? Plith demanded. Your own kind. This doesn't explain why other species should tolerate such displays on shared stations like this one. Actually, Riley said quietly, I was getting to that. But first, I need to show you something specific. A particular kind of human gathering that might clarify why this tradition evolved beyond simple winter celebrations. She pulled up new files. Her expression shifted slightly, became more serious. With the Council's permission, I'd like to establish a live holographic feed to a location on Earth. It's morning there. The children should be awake. This request caused murmurs throughout the chamber. Live feeds were rarely used in council sessions. They were expensive and often considered theatrical rather than informative. Children, Vresh asked suspiciously, what manipulation is this? No manipulation, Riley assured him. Simply context. You want to understand our tree tradition? Then you need to see where it matters most. Not in wealthy homes or public celebrations, but in a place called Riverside Children's Home. She paused, meeting the eyes of various counselors. You wanted to understand why we keep this tradition despite its inefficiency. Why we spend resources on dying trees. The answer isn't in history or symbolism. It's in the present. It's in what these trees mean to specific people. Approve the feed, said a Keltheran representative. Orth had apparently reported the situation to his superiors, and they'd send a senior counselor to observe. Let's see what the ambassador considers so important. Vresh objected, but he was overruled. The vote passed. Riley was granted permission to establish the connection that AS technicians worked to set up the feed. Riley allowed herself a small breath of relief. This was the moment that mattered. Everything before had been preamble. Soon they would see. Soon they would understand, or at least, she hoped they would. The holographic feed stabilized, and suddenly the council chamber wasn't just filled with aliens anymore. It was filled with children, dozens of them, ranging from tiny ones barely steady on their feet to teenagers nearly adult. They moved through a large common room where a tree stood, easily 4 meters tall and covered in lights that hadn't been turned on yet. The children carried boxes of decorations, chattering excitedly as adult supervisors coordinated the organized chaos. This is Riverside Children's Home, Riley explained, her voice softer now. One of 300 similar facilities across Earth. A youth education center? Plith asked, her tone still skeptical but less hostile. Why should we care about their curriculum activities? Not an education center, Riley corrected. An orphanage. These children have no parents. Some were abandoned. Some lost their families to accidents or illness or violence. Others were removed from dangerous situations. They live here because they have nowhere else to go. The chamber went quiet. Several species shifted uncomfortably. The concept of orphans wasn't universal, but most spacefaring civilizations understood the basic idea of young beings without guardians that a small girl, maybe 6 years old, climbed a stepladder with help from an older boy. She held an ornament carefully in both hands, a delicate glass angel with wings that caught the light. Her face showed intense concentration as she found the perfect branch. That's Beth, Riley said quietly. She's been at Riverside for 2 years. The ornament belonged to her mother. Beth secured the angel to the tree, then stepped back to admire it. Even through the hollow feed, her expression of mingled sadness and pride was unmistakable. Why does she keep it? Asked the Kelthran counselor. Among my people, items belonging to the deceased are recycled. Maintaining attachments to the dead is considered unhealthy. Different cultures handle grief differently, Riley replied. For Beth, that angel is one of the few physical connections she has to her mother. Hanging it on the tree isn't about worshiping death. It's about remembering love. The feed continued. A teenage boy with dark hair and careful hands worked on a star made from recycled materials. Wire and salvage electronics and bits of colored plastic all woven together with impressive skill. That's Carlos, Riley explained. He's 17. Been at Riverside since he was 9. He wants to be an engineer. That star? He makes a new one every year, each one more complex than the last. Carlos finished his creation and climbed up to place it high on the tree. Other children gathered to watch, calling out encouragement. When he secured it successfully, they cheered. He climbed down with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. I don't understand, Vresh said, and for once he didn't sound mocking. If these young have no families, no genetic investment from adults, why provide them with celebrations? Why waste resources on those who contribute nothing to your species' advancement? The question hung in the air like poison. Riley turned to face him directly. Because they're children, she said simply. Because every child deserves to know joy. Because society is measured not by how we treat the useful, but by how we treat the vulnerable. The feed showed more children decorating now. Each ornament came with a story. A paper snowflake made in art therapy. A photo of a sibling who'd been adopted into another family. A clay handprint from a child's first day at Riverside. The tree became a tapestry of memories, hopes, and small survivals. The decorations are donated by the community, Riley continued. Local families buy ornaments and attach encouraging notes. You matter. Someone believes in you. Your future is bright. Strangers taking time to remind these children that they're seen. An older woman moved through the room, helping younger children reach higher branches. Her gray hair and gentle manner suggested years of experience. That's director Sarah Wilson, Riley said. She grew up at Riverside herself, came back as an adult to work here. Most of the staff are volunteers. Many are former residents. They remember what the tree meant to them. Sentiment, Plith muttered, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Yes, Riley agreed. Exactly. Sentiment. Caring about others not because they're useful, but because they're worthy of care. Is that such a foreign concept? The Kelthran counselor spoke up. Among my people, parentless young are placed in efficiency centers. They receive education and training based on aptitude. Resources are allocated according to potential contribution to society. It is logical. And do they receive this? Riley gestured to the feed, where children now sang together as they worked. Not professionally, not even particularly well, but with genuine enthusiasm. Do they receive moments of pure joy? Do they get to feel like they matter not for what they'll produce someday, but for who they are right now? The Kelthran was silent. The feed shifted to show a side room where staff members wrapped gifts. Mountains of donated presents, each tagged with a child's name and age. Toys and books and clothes and electronics, all given by people who would never meet the recipients. This happens every year, Riley explained. Across Earth, in every orphanage and children's home, communities come together to make sure these children experience what other children experience. Family, celebration, hope. A small boy, perhaps 4 years old, hugged a staff member while staring at the tree with wide eyes. His face showed wonder so pure it transcended species barriers. "That's James," Riley said. "He arrived at Riverside 3 months ago. This is his first tree. His first celebration where adults focused on making him happy instead of," she paused, "instead of other things. Watch his face." They watched. James's expression as the tree lights flickered on for a test run was one of absolute awe, like he'd witnessed magic. "The tree will die eventually," Riley acknowledged. "In a few weeks, it'll be composted, returned to the earth. But what it gave these children, that lasts. Those memories of being valued, being celebrated, being part of something beautiful, those persist." She looked around the chamber at alien faces displaying various levels of discomfort, confusion, and in some cases, what might have been understanding. "You want to know why we keep this tradition? There's your answer. Not for the families who can afford their own trees. Not for the wealthy or powerful. For them. For the children who have nothing else." Riley expanded the holographic feed. Images multiplied across the chamber's projection space. Riverside wasn't alone. Orphanages in Tokyo showed children decorating trees with origami cranes and paper lanterns. In Nairobi, kids wrapped colorful fabric around branches and hung carved wooden animals. A facility in Rio displayed trees adorned with bright ribbons and handmade stars. London, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney. Every continent, every culture adapting the tradition in their own way, but the core remaining constant. Different trees, different decorations, different customs, Riley narrated. But every single one centered on children who needed to feel valued. Plith moved closer to the projections, her compound eyes processing multiple feeds simultaneously. "You're showing me outliers. Emotional manipulation through carefully selected examples." "Am I?" Riley pulled up statistical data alongside the images. There are currently 4.2 million children in orphanages and foster systems across Earth. 97% of these facilities incorporate some form of winter celebration. The tradition is universal precisely because the need is universal. She highlighted specific data points. Studies show children who participate in these celebrations demonstrate 40% higher resilience scores, better social integration, lower rates of depression and anxiety. The Kelthorne counselor's crystalline form refracted light as he shifted position. "You're arguing from efficiency now? Earlier you dismissed efficiency as a primary value." "No, relay corrective. I'm saying that kindness produces results, but that's not why we practice it. We don't celebrate these children because it makes them more productive adults. We celebrate them because celebration is what children deserve." Vresh had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now he spoke. "Your sentiment is noted, Ambassador. However, you're avoiding a fundamental question. These children lack genetic investment from contributing members of society. Resources spent on them are resources not spent on optimal bloodlines. How do you justify this inefficiency?" Riley met his gaze steadily. "By asking a different question, Counselor, what makes a bloodline optimal? Who decides which children deserve resources and which don't? Genetic viability, productivity potential, family contribution to society." Vresh listed automatically. "Standard metrics. And when those optimal bloodlines produce a child who becomes orphaned," Riley asked quietly, "what happens then?" The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. "Among Vrethians," Riley continued, accessing public records with the Council's database permissions, children who lose their familial bonds after age 3 are classified as non-viable. They're removed from population centers and placed in isolation facilities until they reach maturity, at which point they're exiled to labor colonies. "Is that correct?" Vresh's throat sacs contracted. "That is an internal matter. It's a choice," Riley said. Just as our celebration of orphans is a choice. You choose efficiency. We choose compassion. Both are deliberate decisions about what kind of civilization we want to build. She returned to the feeds, focusing now on individual stories. This is Director Wilson again. Orphaned at 7. Raised at Riverside. She earned degrees in child psychology and social work. She's published 3 books on trauma recovery in children. She's helped thousands of young people build meaningful lives. Another image appeared. A middle-aged man in a medical uniform. Dr. Andrew Liu, orphaned at 5, grew up in a facility in San Francisco. He's now one of Earth's leading pediatric surgeons. He volunteers at children's hospitals across Asia. More faces, more stories. Scientists, artists, teachers, engineers, parents. All of them orphans who'd grown up with trees and celebrations and communities that refused to discard them. You call them non-viable, Riley said. We call them human beings with potential. Plitha's mandibles clicked rapidly, processing information. These are exceptions, statistical anomalies. Surely most orphans don't achieve such success. Define success, Riley challenged. Carlos from Riverside wants to be an engineer. Maybe he will be. Maybe he'll end up doing something else. Does that make him less worthy of celebration? Beth lost her mother. She'll carry that grief forever. Does that mean she doesn't deserve joy? The feed showed the Riverside common room again. The tree now fully decorated, children gathered around it. Staff members distributed hot chocolate. The scene was chaotic and loud and utterly ordinary in its warmth. Success isn't measured in achievements alone, Riley continued. It's measured in moments like this, in children learning that they matter, that they're part of a community. That loss doesn't mean the end of love. A new voice entered the discussion. Ambassador Chen raises valid points. Everyone turned. The speaker was a Keltheran senior counselor, one who rarely participated in cultural debates. His crystalline structure held visible impurities, signs of great age. Our species prides itself on logic, the Keltheran continued. But logic requires complete data. I've accessed records of human orphans rescued by Keltheran vessels over the past century. 47 individuals, all placed in our youth efficiency centers. Would you like to know the outcomes? He didn't wait for an answer. Data flooded the chamber's displays. 32 failed to integrate. They were deemed non-productive and recycled. 11 achieved minimal functionality. For Excel by our standards. Compare this to the 47 human orphans we returned to Earth authorities. All 47 survived. 39 achieved what humans call productive lives. 8 struggled, but received ongoing support. The Keltheran's voice held something that might have been regret. We optimized for efficiency and produced failure. Humans optimize for care and produce survivors. The data suggests we've been asking the wrong questions. Vresh started to object, but the Keltheran cut him off. No, Counsle. This isn't sentiment. It's evidence. Human methods, however inefficient they appear, generate superior outcomes. Perhaps because young beings require more than mere survival. Perhaps they require what these trees represent. Riley watched the realization spread through the chamber. Not universal acceptance. Many species still seemed skeptical or hostile. But enough were listening. Enough were considering. The trees die, she said softly. But what they give while they live matters. They give beauty. They give gathering points for community. They give orphaned children a reason to hope. And yes, they're inefficient. Caring always is. But civilizations that forget how to care about their most vulnerable inevitably become monstrous. The feeds continued playing. Children laughing, decorating, celebrating, being seen and valued and loved. In the gallery above, Danny wiped his eyes. He'd been one of those children once. The tree in his memory had saved him in ways he still couldn't articulate. Vresh stood abruptly, his skin flushing deep purple with agitation. This is manipulation. Cherry-picked data designed to make us question practices that have served our species for millennia. The Vrithian way produces strength. Your coddling produces weakness. Does it? Riley asked calmly. Let's examine that claim. She pulled up comparative data. Military performance. scientific innovation, social cohesion metrics, cultural resilience. The numbers painted a clear picture. Human societies that invest in orphan care show stronger overall outcomes than those that don't, Riley explained. And compared to species with orphan elimination policies, we demonstrate superior adaptability, innovation rates, and long-term stability. Correlation without causation. Vresh dismissed. Your species has other advantages. Then explain this. Riley highlighted a specific dataset. Earth had a period in its history where certain regions did practice orphan elimination or severe neglect. 19th and early 20th centuries. Industrial orphanages where children were treated as economic units rather than people. You know what happened? She let the question hang before answering it herself. Those regions produced entire generations damaged by the cruelty. Crime rates soared. Social bonds weakened. The economic costs of that damage exceeded any resources saved. We learned, counselor, we learned that discarding the vulnerable doesn't produce strength. It produces broken societies. Plitha's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Yet you admit humans themselves once practiced these policies. Why should we believe you've truly evolved beyond such thinking? Because we chose to change, Riley said. We looked at the suffering we caused and decided it was unacceptable. We built systems to protect children instead of abandoning them. We created traditions like these trees specifically to remind ourselves that every child matters. The holographic feeds shifted again. Now they showed not just orphanages but the communities around them. Volunteers arriving with gifts. Local businesses donating supplies. Families hosting orphans for holiday meals. Retired teachers offering tutoring. The web of care extended far beyond institutional walls. This is what civilization looks like, Riley said. Not perfection, not efficiency, but communities choosing to care for those who need it most. Suddenly, movement in the gallery caught everyone's attention. A young Vrithian stood, trembling. His skin showed patterns of deep distress, colors shifting rapidly between fear and determination. Permission to speak, he said, his voice barely audible. The chamber fell silent. Junior observers rarely spoke during council sessions, never during formal inquiries. Granted, said the Keltheran counselor, his tone gentle. The young Vrithian descended to the main floor. As he moved, several Vrithian delegates began gesturing frantically, trying to signal him to stop. He ignored them. My name is Trell. He began, each word seeming to cost him. I'm listed in official records as a trade analyst from the Vrithian merchant fleet. That's a lot. Vresh's throat sacs inflated dangerously. You will cease this immediately. I'm an orphan, Trell continued, louder now. My parents died in a factory accident when I was 8. Under Vrithian law, that made me non-viable. I was scheduled for removal to an isolation facility. The Vrithian delegates were standing now, demanding Trell be removed. But the senior Keltheran counselor raised a crystalline appendage for silence. And surprisingly, the chamber obeyed. Continue. The Keltheran encouraged that Trell's skin showed patterns of old grief. A human cargo ship captain found me hiding in her vessel's hold. She could have turned me over to authorities. Instead, she took me to a human colony world. I lived there for 3 years with a foster family. His voice cracked slightly. They had a tree. Every winter. They included me in everything. Decorating, singing, opening gifts. They celebrated that I existed, not what I could provide. It was the first time in my life anyone had done that. Riley remained silent, letting Trell speak. I learned their languages, their customs, their way of seeing orphans not as waste products, but as children deserving of love. When I was old enough, I returned to Vrithian space using falsified documents. I've lived in hiding ever since, pretending to be from an intact bloodline. He turned to face Vresh directly. You want to talk about strength, counselor? I survived your system's cruelty. I learned from humans that survival isn't the same as living. That tree the ambassador showed you, that kindness you mock, that saved my life in ways your efficiency never could. The chamber erupted. Vrithian delegates demanded Trell's arrest. Other species representatives shouted questions. The senior Keltheran called for order repeatedly. Through the chaos, Riley watched Trell's courage and felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. One testimony from a real orphan carried more weight than all her carefully prepared data. When order finally returned, Trell remained standing. I know other Vrithian orphans in hiding. Dozens of us, scattered across the galaxy. All saved by human intervention. All learning that the way we were treated was wrong. Your system isn't strong, Counselor Vresh. It's cruel. And cruelty isn't strength. It's just cruelty. Vresh seemed unable to speak. His skin had gone pale, cycling through colors that suggested profound shock. The senior Keltherin addressed the chamber. This testimony is recorded and entered into the official record. Counselor Vresh, I believe your planet's government will have questions about implementation of your orphan policies. This is an internal matter, Vresh began. Nothing is internal when it involves the deliberate destruction of viable young beings, the Keltherin interrupted. The Council has oversight on such matters. You will answer questions. Riley pulled up the live feeds one more time. The children at Riverside had finished decorating. They sat together now, sharing hot chocolate and cookies, basking in the tree's light. Ordinary, beautiful, human. The tree dies, she said quietly, but her voice carried across the stunned chamber. But it gives its last beauty to light the darkness for those who need it most. That's what civilization is, counselors. The strong giving their strength so the vulnerable can grow strong too. She looked at Trell, who stood with tears running down his face, his secret finally revealed. That's what these trees mean. Not death, life, hope, the radical idea that every child deserves both. No one laughed now. No one mocked that I end the silence. Something fundamental had shifted. 3 weeks after the council session, Riley sat in her quarters reviewing reports that still seemed surreal. The Keltherin Collective had established what they called youth enrichment centers across their territories. The name was bureaucratic, but the content was revolutionary. Orphan Keltherin young would no longer be processed through efficiency calculations. They would be raised in communities. They would have celebrations. They would have trees adapted to Keltherin aesthetics, but serving the same purpose. Plith had submitted a formal paper to the Quillax Academic Council questioning their species' orphan protocols. The response had been divided, but 17 research facilities had begun pilot programs incorporating what Plith called emotional enrichment practices. It was a start. Most surprisingly, donations had started arriving at Riverside and other Earth orphanages from across the galaxy. Alien toys, strange technologies modified for human children, educational materials, credits from species that had watched the council feed and felt compelled to contribute. Director Wilson had sent Riley a video message showing Beth's reaction to receiving a Keltherin crystal sculpture that projected her mother's favorite constellation across her bedroom ceiling. The girl had cried, then laughed, then carefully placed it where she could see it every night. Carlos had received scholarship offers from 4 different alien universities. He'd chosen the Quillax Engineering Academy, the same species that had once called human traditions primitive, but not everything had changed for the better. Vresh faced a recall vote from his own people, but the Vrithian government was fighting the council's investigation into their orphan policies. Half the species representatives who'd attended that session still considered human practices wasteful and sentimental. Riley didn't expect universal transformation. She'd learned long ago that changing minds took time, and changing systems took longer. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. Danny entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. You need to see this, he said, setting the cups down and activating his personal data pad. The screen showed the station's recreational deck, specifically the area designated for multi-species community use. Where there had been empty floor space, now stood a tree. Not a massive one, but decent-sized, decorated with an absolutely chaotic mix of ornaments from different cultures. Keltherin crystals hung next to Quillax silk weavings. Human glass spheres reflected light from Intherin bioluminescent pods. The aesthetic was bizarre, but somehow it worked. Who authorized this? Riley asked, though she was smiling. The station commander, Danny replied. Apparently, 15 different species representatives requested a shared celebration space. They voted to make it permanent. Every winter season, there'll be a tree. Every species contributes decorations. Any station resident can participate. Riley zoomed in on the image. At the base of the tree, a small plaque had been installed. She read it aloud. For those far from home. For those who've lost homes. For those still searching for home. You matter. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. There's more, Danny said softly. He pulled up another image. A young Vrethian child, clearly an orphan based on the markings Danny had learned to recognize from Trell, hanging an ornament on the tree. A human family stood nearby, encouraging the child with gentle words. That's one of Trell's contacts, Danny explained. A kid he helped smuggle to the station last month. The family agreed to foster. It's unofficial, but the station commander is looking the other way. Riley set down her coffee before she could spill it. Her hands weren't quite steady. How many? She asked. 16 orphans currently on the station from species with elimination policies. All quietly placed with human families or multi-species households willing to take them. Trell's coordinating. Says there are hundreds more who need help. The weight of that number sat heavy. Hundreds of children marked for death or isolation, now potentially finding safety. All because one council session had forced uncomfortable truths into the open. Riley pulled up a connection request she'd been debating for days. Director Wilson answered immediately, her face filling the screen. Ambassador Chun, I was hoping you'd call. I need to ask a favor, Riley began. It's going to sound impossible. Sarah smiled. Most worthwhile things do. What do you need? Can Riverside accept alien children? Species with different biology, different needs, different communication methods? We already are, Sarah replied calmly. Word spreads fast. We've got 3 Keltherin young arriving next week. The board approved expanding our facilities. We're hiring xenobiologists and cultural specialists. It's going to be chaotic. She gestured to something off-screen. But you know what? The kids are excited. They've been researching different species, learning basic phrases in other languages. Beth wants to teach the Keltherin children about her angel ornament. Carlos is building adaptive tools so everyone can participate in decorating regardless of their physiology. Riley felt something unknot in her chest. You understand this could get complicated. Politically, diplomatically, children aren't complicated, Sarah interrupted gently. Adults make them complicated. Children just need to know someone cares. We can provide that regardless of how many legs they have or what atmosphere they breathe. After ending the call, Riley walked to her own small tree. The lights cast familiar shadows. She touched one ornament, a simple wooden sphere Danny had carved with surprising skill. On it, he'd written a single word, hope. Her comm unit signaled incoming messages, updates from various council representatives. Some positive, requesting information about establishing similar programs. Some hostile, condemning her for interfering in other species' internal affairs. She'd respond to them all eventually, but for now, she just stood with the tree, thinking about Beth and Carlos and James, about Trell and the courage it took to reveal himself, about the hundreds of orphan children who might survive because people chose compassion over efficiency. The tree would die soon. Its needles were already beginning to drop. In a few weeks, it would be composted, returned to elements. But the children who'd been touched by what it represented, they would live. They would grow. They would remember that someone had cared enough to create beauty in darkness. Riley activated her personal log. Ambassador's notes, supplemental. The council session on human cultural traditions concluded with unexpected results. Multiple species are reconsidering their approaches to orphan youth. Resistance remains strong in some quarters, but momentum is building. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I used to think our job was to make other species understand humanity. I'm learning it's simpler than that. Our job is to show them what's possible when you choose to value every life, especially the ones others discard. The trees help us remember that choice. Now, maybe they'll help the galaxy remember it too. The recording ended. The tree's lights continued their gentle glow. Outside her window, the station hung against the stars, filled with thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds. And somewhere in those corridors, Orphaned children from different species were learning that they mattered. One dead tree at a time. The galaxy was learning what civilization really meant.